All right. Hi, Gary. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, hello.
Nice to have you on the show. Thank you for coming on.
Truly, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me.
So, you've got a book out called SOL, Still Our Lions, and I'm assuming this is about football and the Detroit Lions. Is that correct?
That is correct. The book will be coming out in September, but otherwise, that's correct. Well, it's about the Detroit Lions and about the city of Detroit. It's kind of a parallel history of the two, and in particular, it spends a lot of time on kind of the twin decline that they experienced from the early '60s until present times.
Okay. Well, I'm out of my element to talk about football. Although I'm familiar with the game, I know how it's played. I am not an avid sports fan that follows the teams, okay? But I could probably talk about Detroit because I'm probably more into cars and know
Sure.
something about the auto industry. But I'm curious. Tell me about the parallel between the two.
Yeah, certainly. And hey, just to put you at ease, really, I know you'd be very literate. Sort of George Plimpton was kind of the inspiration of the book. He was one of the inspirations. He wrote a great book about the Lions back in the early '60s when they were still good. But what's really interesting is that both the Detroit Lions, and again, which you may not know, but their SOL has a more common usage than the one than what I've called it on my book. Here in Detroit, beyond kind of its primary usage across the country, it stands for Same Old Lions, and that's because the team has been awful for decades. In my opinion, they're probably the
Okay.
worst team in sports, really, since they were purchased by the Fords in 1963, and it was clearly an awful omen. He bought the team on the same day that President Kennedy was shot. But they've been very bad for years. And Detroit, obviously, in the 50s was the third largest city in the country. It was seen as one of the models for race relations, even though clearly there were major cracks beneath the surface. But by the 60s, for both of those entities, things had really started to go badly. And when I say go badly, I mean in a way that both almost became the punchlines of national jokes when it comes to ineptitude. The history of the city of Detroit has obviously been very challenging. There was the violence in the late '60s, which people are very familiar with, and the city obviously has continued to shrink. Until just recently, it seemed like things got worse every decade, and that's kind of what the story has been, for the Lions. So I look at this as kind of almost like just taking a couple of things that are similar but not quite the same, but that are closely connected, and that intersect in some interesting ways, and have these parallel paths. And the goal is to sort of examine what has happened, why are we in the state that we are in today, and maybe where are things going.
Okay. Have the Lions ever won the Super Bowl?
This will shock you, but since the Super Bowl has been a thing in 1967, not only have we not won a Super Bowl in my lifetime, not in my lifetime, in that entire time, because I wasn't quite born yet, we've won one single playoff game. So it's a crazy statistic. In 1991, the team won its only playoff game.
Oh,
So even teams today that we think of as being terrible, like the New York Jets, they had Joe Namath and they won Super Bowl III. The Lions have never even won that second playoff.
so what is the sort of condition of Detroit these days? I've only ever been through the airport, and that was back in the days when Northwest Orient hub was there. So
Sure.
it's been a few years, but the auto industry seems to kind of come and go. We were doing really well through the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Then the late 70s with the gas shortages and things, Detroit scrambled to try to make cars smaller than the Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham, and
Right.
they kind of went downhill. I remember buying cars in the 80s that were just crap, absolute
Yeah.
garbage. And so I said, if this is what America is going to turn out, then I'm going with a Japanese car, because at that point they were just so much better, right? But now they've
Yeah.
come back, or at least they appear to. But how much of the manufacturing is actually still done there?
Significantly less than has been the case. And really, I'm talking about the city of Detroit, in my book, as opposed to kind of the metro Detroit area. But the city itself had really crumbled, and decade after decade, people keep leaving the city. You look at 10-year periods, and I think it was between the 80s and the 90s. It might have been to the 70s and the 80s, but we're losing, in that period, 80,000 people have fled the city, right? More people than live in other cities that you've heard of.
Wow.
And so almost the city has almost kind of evolved past what the auto industry, would be able to salvage, because there's not a lot of manufacturing in the city now. The transportation is, the city, we don't have a good public transportation system. And a lot of the phenomenon that people think of, like those with money leaving the city, which usually means those people with white skin leaving the city, that's been a real phenomenon. So the city has gotten smaller. A lot of the people who have money have left. And so you have a city with an infrastructure that's built for 2 million people, with, maybe 700,000 of them now, maybe a little bit more than that. But you have this giant area that is sort of dilapidated and falling apart. It poses its own new problems. Now, all that said, my son, who just turned 18, he's leaving to go just in a couple of days. He'll be moving into campus on Wayne State, which is right in the middle of Detroit. So there are parts of Detroit, the downtown and the campus areas, which are starting to really bounce back. But the city is still in bad shape. Large parts of it are.
Well, what besides the auto industry is there?
These days, when you go to Detroit, what's interesting is, I think what you notice most, so there are some businesses, Dan Gilbert, and Rock Financial, and some of his businesses are there. CompuWare, the Illiches, of Little Caesars are there. But what's interesting now is, because the city has lost people and lost money for so long, now it feels like, I describe it as a city of urbanauts, young, adventurous people who are coming into the city and reclaiming it, right? Typically people with some money and coming from some education, but they tend to be young, because Detroit still is not, most of the schools are not places, let's just say lots of people opt for private education. There's still not a tremendous amount of grocery stores and stuff. But what you do get in Detroit are lots of artisan bakeries. You get, Jack White of the White Stripes has built, a studio and a record store here. You get lots of very interesting things that are not necessarily the staples that you find in all of the other cities. It's just a very unique environment.
Well, didn't Eminem and Kid Rock, aren't they both from that area?
Oh, so musically, and I don't go into all this a great deal in Still Our Lions, but the amount of amazing music that has come out of Detroit is simply staggering, across all genres.
Oh, you know who else is the new group? Greta Van Fleet, aren't they from there? I love them. I think they're awesome.
I think that you're right. Honestly, I'd forgotten about them, but really starting in the '50s with Motown, and Detroit has never really had a period where relevant and excellent music was coming from it. That has been one of the staples of the city.
So the music industry is still pretty viable in Detroit, yeah. Yes,
although ironically, those people will often leave. Detroit is where a lot of people come from, but a lot of people still go to New York or LA to record. And ironically, we don't even get in a lot of great shows here. Lots of musicians don't play here, but the amount of artists that we produce is truly staggering. I didn't really realize how great the disparity was until I started comparing it to some other cities. And it really is. There's a handful of cities in the country, LA, Seattle, maybe New York City, and Detroit is in that list.
What is the status of the Detroit Lions for this fall? Are they where are they placed?
They're not expected to do particularly well, and we're at. If you think of the Detroit Lions as Sisyphus, as somebody who we get the best intentions for and starts to push the boulder, but it's always going to roll back down on them. We're at the beginning of a cycle that tends to last about 3 or 4 years here, which is we've replaced our coach, we've replaced our general manager, our long-standing quarterback, who really is a superstar. He has been traded out because he wasn't going to win here. He wanted to go. So we're at a time of optimism and hope because it's a new start. Most people would not feel good about, being at the beginning of a rebuilding, but bizarre way for Detroit fans, it's almost like home, not because it's so wonderful or because it's where we want to be, but because it's just comfortable, because we've done it so many times. And by the second year and by the third year, historically, what has happened is that hope has evaporated, and by year 4 or whatever it happens to be, we're starting this process again. So we are just starting a new rebuild.
Well, we do have to kind of wind this down. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, absolutely. You can learn a little bit more about the book at stillourlions.com. That's the best place to look. And when the books go on sale, you'll be able to buy them. There'll be links, to Amazon to buy from there. But that's where I recommend people go. There's a blog and some other things you can check out as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming on this show and sharing your views and opinions of Detroit. Have you lived there your whole life?
So, and I'll be honest, I live in Metro Detroit. I don't live in the city, but I have been in Detroit routinely, yes, except I've moved away from Michigan a couple times and I keep coming back, and I spend a great deal of time in Detroit. So, yes, I've always been very close to it.
The one place that I've wanted to go that I've just never gotten to yet is the Upper Peninsula. It looks absolutely beautiful up there in the summer.
And It's 100%. If you're in for kind of an idyllic, slow, quiet vacation, it's wonderful. It's beautiful.
Now, how far is that from Detroit? How far to drive?
Oh, to get there, you're probably going to drive about 4 hours to get to the Mackinac Bridge, which separates, Michigan from the UP, and that's pretty much a straight north shot. Once you get into the Upper Peninsula, then it goes another 4 or 5 hours, west. So you can take it pretty much all the way to Wisconsin. So to drive from Detroit up into the Upper Peninsula and all the way over, to the edge of it, you'd probably be in the car for 10 hours.
Okay. I mean, it's doable. It's a long drive, but
yeah, you'd want to break it up into some. There's plenty of places to stop along the way, though, and enjoy yourself.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Gary, for coming on the show. Nice meeting you. Best of luck with the book. I hope it does well.